Thank you, Jean-Jacques, using this microphone so I can walk around a bit. So first of all, I really would like to thank Jean-Jacques for inviting me, but also for organizing this conference. The objectives he has laid out, I think, are crystal clear, and it is quite impressive how much thought went into preparing this conference, and I'm very happy to see all these sessions which you have organized and which will be coming, because exploration is a topic that is certainly on many people's mind, including the one of ESA. There's a lot of discussion ongoing. I don't need to dwell on the various activities that are discussed, but it is really something that is, I'd like to see Francis' remark at the very last slide. Mars seems impossible, but is what everyone talks about. I think it is very well summarized, and this is certainly happening in many people's minds. But I'm also happy to see a lot of young people here. This is very inspiring. Jean-Jacques has done a very good job with the Academy to make sure that there is a lot of young people, more young than older people, and I think this is exactly what we want to see, to give the inspiration and to make sure that the thoughts which we are putting on place here are carried forward by you, because as you have seen, it needs decades until programs are established and become to life, and certainly something as ambitious as Mars is very far away. We have just seen all the rationale, but there are also steps before that which are quite interesting and which are in between. So let me give you a few thoughts on a short update of where we stand on the exploration activities in ESA and in Europe, and a few thoughts on where this could go. And as you have just heard before by Francis, the budget of Europe on exploration is much smaller than the one of NASA. Actually, you have been very generous of already increasing the exploration budget by about 50%, because the ratio is about 7% or 7 to 8% of what NASA is spending on exploration. Of course, this fluctuates a little bit year by year, but this is the order of magnitude. It's certainly one magnitude smaller than what is spent in the NASA context. Just to start, and this is more meant for as a kickoff, what is ESA? Of course, you all know ESA does not need to be introduced, but there's probably one figure that might be of interest. ESA is really implementing a large portion of the public funding in space in Europe. 60% is the figure, which of course means that the programs which we initiate have a major impact on activities, on how space develops, how procurements are taking place, but also the industrial policy that is connected with it, and on the receiving end, the science, with not only the receiving at the beginning and the receiving end, the science that are defining many of our missions, and then of course the science community and the user community at large, which are the users of these various data produced by the satellites and the activities in this context. The other 40%, by the way, is European Union budget, EUMETSAT, national budgets, CNES, DLR, RC, and several others. So this is quite significant. The budgets, you know the figures, is about 7 billion this year. It keeps increasing over time, which is the good news, but of course, if you put this in relation with the NASA budget, it is a fraction of it. NASA has a budget proposal from the White House of more than 25 billion for next year, and this is a factor of 3 to 4 in between what we have in Europe, at least at the level of ESA. But, and I think this is fair to say, the money is well used, also thanks to the enormous competition which we have in Europe. We have to do with less money more, and therefore the products that are developed by our industry are very competitive, meaning that our industry is also quite successful in the export market when commercial opportunities come up, and I think this is also a strength of Europe, to be smaller but very good, excellent, and also very competitive. And this is certainly thanks also to the ESA system that was put together over decades to maximize this competition and therefore get really good value for money. And Jean-Jacques, being with us, has been an architect and certainly somebody who has been has been shaping this competition and the competitiveness of Europe for many, many years, and I think all Europe can be quite grateful for these achievements, that we are in a strong position today, despite being smaller compared to some of our international peers. Let me now go a bit into depth and show some of the, milestones that are happening this year. So what you see is just a few key elements. Of course, a lot is happening within the ESA context in the course of a year, but these are some of the highlights that you also see in the various press articles and announcements. All of you have noticed that we have selected 17 new astronauts in November last year at the ministerial conference, or together with the ministerial conference. 5 of them are career astronauts, and the others are reserve astronauts. The first time ever that we have introduced this notion of a reserve astronaut, which means that they are selected as potential astronauts, and if opportunities are coming up, we can train them and fly them on future opportunities. And in fact, this happened much faster than we expected, because our astronaut policy has already foreseen that we have the opportunity to fly commercial astronauts, and I've just signed 3 weeks ago at the Colorado Spring Symposium an agreement with Axiom, a framework agreement between ESA and Astrium, that we can fly some of our reserve astronauts or astronauts on a commercial mission, in addition, of course, to the ISS missions which we are planning with NASA. So these astronauts, there are 5 of them that are being trained right now in Cologne, plus a 6th one, which was also unexpected, and I think this is also a nice side product of the astronaut policy which we have put in place, because one of the reserve astronauts has dual nationality, UK as a British and Australian. It's a lady, Catherine, and she has been working already at the Australian Space Agency, and Australia has decided, or has asked ESA whether we could train this UK Australian astronaut of the reserve list as an ESA in our ESA facilities, and she is being trained right now together with our other 5 ESA career astronauts. So we have actually 6 astronauts now in training, one of them under the sponsorship and the flag of Australia, but since she has dual nationality, she was selected by us, by myself, as part of the November batch of last year. So this is actually also a very nice example showing the geopolitical aspect of astronauts or space exploration, where we can establish through these astronauts also international cooperations, and Australia certainly being a very interesting partner. And one more comment on the astronauts. One of the astronauts that was also selected last year is a para-astronaut. That means an astronaut with a handicap, and we are going through a study right now with this para-astronaut, John McFall from the UK. He has actually he lost part of his leg in an accident, in a motorcycle accident. Has all the other qualifications, but of course has a prosthesis, and we are now doing studies what it means for a person like him to fly to the space station. Do we need adjustments on the spaceship, on the space station itself? Of course, the prosthesis may not work in microgravity, so there's many work we have to undertake to see whether he also could be an astronaut, because we also would like to give a symbol that astronauts is not only for test pilots, but also for really other people. Of course, you need many other qualities to have, but also a handicap should not be a showstopper of becoming an astronaut. So there's a lot going on this part, and I think this is quite interesting and quite important. JUICE, all of you have followed it, I'm sure. It's an incredible mission, and in the run-up to the launch, I have really read a bit the science part of the mission, which is just incredible, just so fascinating. I see some of the scientists here in the room. What this mission is capable of observing and studying is really quite extraordinary. It's a bit the same dimension almost as Rosetta. Rosetta has been a mission of a decade, but JUICE will be another mission of a decade, which is quite unique, to study the habitability of the icy moons of Jupiter, 3 of them, and see whether life, conditions for life could be there or not. And this is, of course, the ultimate question for search of life, which we do with exploration, among other things. And this is a very interesting mission. So JUICE has been very successfully launched. Ariane 5 have done a very precise insertion into the orbit and is now on its way to Jupiter. Of course, the commissioning phase of the instruments are ongoing. We have a small hiccup on one instrument, which we are resolving right now, but this is certainly something that is not the first time that it happens. We just celebrated Gaia, and I understand Gaia had an enormous amount of technical issues to overcome during the commissioning phase, and now is one of the most successful science missions, creating the largest volumes of data for science for peer-reviewed journals. Another exciting mission coming up is Euclid. Euclid, completely different, looking at dark matter and dark energy, which is, as you all know, the majority of the substance in the universe, at least believed to be, because it is, of course, not well understood. About 95% of our universe is made up of dark energy and dark matter. Only 5% is things like our bodies and the things we can judge. It's almost unimaginable how this works. So the other 95% we are studying with this mission of Euclid to be launched on the 1st or 2nd of July. The spacecraft has already arrived in Kennedy and will be launched very shortly. But again, this is also a mission that shows that addresses questions of science that are so burning and so interesting, and with the technology in terms of instrumentation that is quite unique in order to provide this data. Both JUICE and Euclid will be very unique missions also from a technology point of view, delivering data that doesn't exist from other sources and will be really feeding a lot of science. Andy Morgenstern will be launched on the space station later this year, end of August, early September. Then we have the inaugural flights, of course, of Vega C, or return to flight of Vega C, and the inaugural flight of Ariane 6 coming up. There is no date on purpose on the Ariane 6 flight, because today it is too difficult, or it would be too speculative to mention a date. This is a bit more the time frame when the launch is planned. We are still going through quite some technical hurdles and milestones. We will have more clarity when we go through these in the next few months. By summer, we hope that we have done a number of tests and overcome some of these technical issues. And then by summer, I hope that we are in a position to give a date or a period of the inaugural flight. But it's not too far away, this I can say. But as I said, there is no confirmed date at this point of time. Politically, Space Summit, and I will say a couple of words more, is a very important aspect. But one important element which you see here is in the middle is a transformation. And this is something that is fundamental. Fundamental, why do we do that? This is an exercise that I have started. It's already outlined in the Agenda 2025. But there's so much happening in space, as you all know: commercialization, relationship with the European Union, security, time to contract, all the new players that are coming on board in space through the commercialization process. Some people call it new space. And there's so much happening, and it's going so fast, or faster than in the past. That means we as an institution, we as an organization, we need to change to be relevant, not to become obsolete, but to be relevant, to even drive some of the future initiative, and to really reform ourselves. So in other words, this is more an internal exercise, but of course interfaces with our governance, with the member states. We are re-looking into our processes to be more agile, more dynamic, faster, but still having quality and accountability as the pillars you cannot touch, because we have to be accountable. We are using public money. We have to deliver quality. That means our spacecraft and our rockets have to be reliable. But within these boundary conditions, we are simplifying our processes. And Jean-Jacques and many of you would confirm there's a lot that can be done within these two boundary conditions. And this is exactly what we are doing right now. It's a very deep exercise, which involves a lot of people in-house to make ESA more agile and a very good, relevant driver of space activities for the future, especially in the light of all the competition and all the fast elements going on outside through the commercialization process, which we all know. These are some of the political milestones. sure you have seen some of them and you know much of it. Of course, when I started being DG of ESA on the very first day, on my first day in office as DG, on the 1st of March 2021, I put a document on the table called Agenda 2025. In fact, I have consulted with my member states, with some of you in the room, in order to consolidate the content of this document. But this document lays out the ambition or the priorities for the next couple of years, and I'm sure you have seen it and you have read it, and it certainly is an important framing document that defines our strategy and our long-term ambition. It has a vision of 2035, but of course 25 being the implementation in the next 4 years in order to get to this implementation of 35. Some of it, written also in this document, is to accelerate the use of space in Europe for various users and various domains. And the word acceleration is a very important word in this context, because we want to make sure that space has so many dimensions, has so many uses, and that this is being picked up in society, not by the space community alone, but in agriculture, in disaster management, in medicine, in pharmaceuticals, and many other domains which benefit from space, and there are many, many more than we could think of today. So we have launched an exercise with a high-level advisory group. Again, Jean-Jacques was a member of that group, but together with about 10 other high-level advisors, to tell us how we can best implement this Agenda 25 and how we can best put this acceleration in place. And there was a very important report coming out, resulting in accelerators and inspirators that we are now implementing along this line. We had a Space Summit, the very first Space Summit ever in Europe, which brings together the European Union and the ESA member states. It was in Toulouse, 16th of February last year. President Macron was himself giving a very inspiring speech at this event, really waking up Europe on what should be done and how important space is for many of these sectors, and therefore ensuring the importance of space for many aspects. And exploration is one of the elements that is very prominently listed in the Agenda 25 and has also come out of the Space Summit. And one decision that was made in the Space Summit and reconfirmed by a letter of President Macron to me is to establish another high-level group of advisors to look into exploration, where Europe should go, what Europe should do in exploration. And this is, of course, a big question which we're discussing right now, and I will introduce a bit more in detail what we have done. Then we had the ministerial in November last year. We have another Space Summit planned at the end of this year in Sevilla, another Space Summit planned in Brussels next year, and of course our Ministerial Conference 25 will be another important milestone along this roadmap. These are the three accelerators I mentioned, and the two inspirators that have been the result of the first advisory group of high-level representatives. Space for a Green Future, Rapid and Resilient Crisis Response, Protection of European Space Assets. These are the accelerators where we want to use space for the purpose of citizens, and these are really themes, as you can see here, and this was discussed at length with the various high-level members, some of them politicians, some of them in the space domain, and they have reflected really hard over a couple of months on what and how we can widen the use of space, meaning that we go outside the space box and we relate to those people who are implementing some of the big policies of Europe. Let me take the first one as an example, Space for a Green Future. Many countries, or all countries in Europe, have agreed to decarbonize the economy in the next decades to become carbon neutral or climate neutral by 2050. But of course you need to do that. You need to transform your energy cycles, you need to transform transport mechanisms from diesel cars to electric cars and so on. So you really need to change the economy, and this change of economy of course needs to be done. You need to change the engine of a car, but also in the planning, in the support of it, space can play an important role to monitor the situation, to highlight the priorities, to help decarbonizing the economy. For example, the use of satellites for better navigation can result in reduced carbon emissions if the flight routes are being optimized. Also on city level, if you are
better monitoring and organizing the flow of traffic, you can reduce the carbon footprint. Of course, the conversion of energy from coal plants into photovoltaics or wind energy needs to be planned. You need planning tools where space again can help. Of course, always with other data. And this use of space to answer some of these big questions is at the core of these accelerators. And then you see two inspirators. One is an icy moon sample return mission, and the other one is exactly what we are talking today, European human space exploration, which has been identified by this group and which is at the core of the activity. Yes, this is accelerating the use of space in Europe. This is the ministerial conference of November last year. I think it is fair to say it was a huge success, was really bringing Europe towards the next level of space in Europe, if I may simplify it in this way. And this is something that was also at the core of the ministerial conference. Today, we have space nations. Of course, we all know the capacities of the United States, of China, of Russia, which are in this box of autonomy and capacity on the very top right-hand corner of this box. Europe is somewhere here, is having some autonomy, certainly a very good capacity, and in some cases maybe even higher depending on the domain. But of course, one ambition of Europe, given the size of its economy, given the expertise which we have in Europe, is to somewhere enter into this box here. And that's where the ministerial in November played an important role to lift Europe towards this box here. And these are the figures. 16.9 billion, almost 17 billion, 17% more money compared to the previous ministerial in 2019, plus inflation that comes on top. So it's not only compensation for inflation, the inflation comes on top of this 17% increase. With inflation figures today, that figure probably ends up around 30% increase of budget in absolute figures, but of course you always need to see it in the context of inflation. So it was a big increase of funding which was provided by the member states for many, many, many new projects, very exciting ones. One of the biggest ones in terms of increases was exploration, 36% more compared to the last budget. And this is a priority which I set together with my team and with the member states, and this was really quite an impressive increase. Still small compared to the US, but certainly a strong increase compared to the previous budgets. You see here the breakdown. But let me also put this figure in the context of the boundary conditions which we had at the last ministerial. As you know, in November last year, the war was about half a year old in Ukraine, very devastating. Inflation was double digits in several countries. There was a fear of recession, a recession of the economy, which thank God didn't turn out to happen. But when we were planning the ministerial in the summertime last year and September, October last year, the recession was the bigger fear of the economists and our ministers, and to convince them that in a time of financial difficulties, with inflation, with a recession in front of the door, to put so much money into space is actually quite an achievement, and I think our ministers have recognized the importance of space for their purpose for Europe, and I think this has been a very, very important achievement. I'm not going into the details of this graph here. It's quite an important distribution of tasks, but maybe just to underline the exploration elements. You see here ISS, Moon, Mars as the main ones. Of course, space safety is related to this as well, and the Guyana Space Center and Ariane 6 Vega, which are in future transportation, which are of course important for the navigation part. But you see here, these are the subscriptions by member states on these programs, and I'm showing some of these subscriptions in a minute. Astronauts, I've mentioned them. These are the 17 faces that have been selected, plus the para-astronaut John McFall here, with whom we are going through a study. As you see, these astronauts, there are half ladies and half men. That's a very important achievement into which we looked. Of course, they are all top qualified. Qualification is always the #1 criteria. We had 23,000 applications for these 17 positions. So you see the selection was quite difficult. It almost lasted 2 years in order to come and boil it down to these candidates. And I've just met them last week for a press conference, the first press conference when they are in training, and I can tell you they are fascinating people. They they are having all the sparks and all the energy and inspiration. And I see all these young people here in the room, which is really quite fascinating to work with these people, because they are radiating this energy into the various sectors of society outside the space domain, really into segments that normally it's difficult for us to touch. Exploration roadmap, of course, you all know it very well, Terra Nova. This is the roadmap which we have put on the table for our ministers. It has three main components: the Leo component, the Moon component, and eventually Mars. It's a mix of robotic exploration and human exploration. Of course, as you know, we have at the moment quite a focus on the human exploration, on the ISS participation with NASA programs, but then on Mars we have two major activities that we have received funding for. One of them is a Mars sample return together with NASA, and the other one is ExoMars, which we did, which we had to completely redefine after the war of Russia and Ukraine started, because Russia was a major partner, was the almost equivalent partner on this program, and basically overnight we had to stop this cooperation and restart a completely new mission from scratch. ExoMars, as you know, would have been launched in September last year, and you can imagine what it means for the engineers, for the scientists, that you have the rover, Rosalind Franklin, almost on the launch pad, and you have to decide not to launch. I can tell you this was painful for me as a DG to go through this, because you immediately see the faces of the teams that have been involved in ESA, in the member states, in science, in industry, and this is quite difficult to tell them, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we are not launching this year. We have to completely reconfigure the mission. There was first a big question mark whether we continue or not. Some countries were not convinced to get ExoMars up in space, and they said, look, we have spent so much money already, so much time, put it in a museum, it is worth looking at it. Of course, I was fighting very hard not to do that, and I was happy to convince some of the more critical member states to have the mission now funded. Now we have got the funding, we have got the agreement, and the new launch date is now 2028. Of course, disappointing, very clear, but of course, Mars is a few billion years old. It can wait another 6 years, some people are saying, but of course, this is something that we are working towards. And now it is a mostly European mission with three important components from NASA, which we are getting the commitment organized right now. But it is mostly European mission, and I think this is a very important aspect as well. But let me not talk too much about Mars. Of course, this is robotic. We're not yet at the human element, as mentioned before by Francis. Then Lunar Gateway, there we participate, of course, with NASA very strongly on the Artemis program, Gateway and Orion capsule. We also have European elements on it. I will show them in a minute, Moonlight and Argonaut, and then of course space station participation in the ISS until the end of the decade, and then defining the future afterwards. Exploration, you all have seen live the Artemis mission. I'm sure you have followed it very closely. Let's just watch it for a moment. And I have to give a lot of credit to NASA for these inspirational movies they are putting together. And of course, in terms of communication, they're really excellent. But I think it is also very nice for Europe, because Europe is an essential partner on the Artemis mission. As you know, we are providing the European Service Module, which is powering the Orion spacecraft, which is ensuring that the astronauts can fly to the moon and safely back. which is of course a key component. But I think this is something that is certainly inspiring our generations and highlighting the very strong role that ESA has for the first time in this moon program. Of course, in Apollo, you all know that this was purely American, but now Europe is a very strong partner to the US in going there. So this is something where NASA really has entrusted a lot to Europe and made Europe an important partner. Still small, but a very important partner. Also, we are contributing significantly on the gateway, the IHAB and the Esprit in particular, are European components. You have seen before from Francis the reduced version of the gateway, which is here, and of course the ESM, the European Service Module, which is seen on the back side here. Argonaut, we have mentioned that we have also agreed on the Argonaut, which is a large logistic lander bringing huge masses to the moon. The lander itself on the Earth's surface weighs about 6 tons, but it is capable of transporting 1.5 ton of equipment, of robotics to the moon surface, and doing it on a routine basis. The idea is that, of course, we developed this through the ESA framework as for the first or maybe for several of the first flights, but there's also commercial interest that then a company can really, through a PPP model, have a business case and offer transport to the moon of some equipment or some elements that are needed there. And we have seen before in the presentation of Francis how important it is to bring material, bring logistics onto the moon surface. And this large logistic lander is the first one, will be the biggest for a long time to come, and is supposed to land at the end of this decade, early next decade, but then really throughout the next decade be a transport vehicle bringing mass to the moon. I've mentioned ExoMars. What you see here is the rover, Rosalind Franklin. On the front of the rover here you see the drill that is capable of drilling about 2 meters into the surface. I've spoken about search for life outside our planet before in the context of Jupiter, of the JUICE mission. Another place where exobiologists would look for traces of life or traces of past life would be underneath the surface of Mars. And of course, on the surface of Mars, you don't find any traces because of the radiation and the harsh environment. But if you would look for traces, then you have to dig into the soil, and this drill will be the only one, and certainly the first one that is capable of doing that. And this is exactly the mission which we had to now conduct as a European mission after the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. Of course, a European on Mars, I think this is a very futuristic view. We know how hard this is, and this is certainly very far away from any concrete plans and reality. But of course, this is a long-term horizon goal. This is probably a bit optimistic, seeing that Werner von Braun several decades ago was already thinking that we have colonies on the Mars by today, but certainly something that is a long-term goal. But Europe certainly will first focus on the LEO architecture and the moon architecture for the years to come. And this brings me towards the end of what the next steps are in Europe. I think I made clear that we are at a breaking point in Europe to define what to do, how to do it, and what the next important steps are. So we have, I've invited another group of experts. You see here the names. And these are all, with one exception, all experts not from the space domain. And that was very important in asking for their advice. They are not space people coming from the space domain. The only exception is Anna Rathsman, who is our chair of the ESA Council, who is also the Director General of the Swedish National Space Agency. But all the others, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, previous Secretary General of NATO, Stefania Giannini, politician, Erling Kage was an explorer who was by foot going to the North Pole, to the South Pole, and the Mount Everest as the first and only person doing that. Matsukato, professor for economics, politician, Cedric Ho, also politician, scientist, CEO of BCG, one of the largest consultancy companies, an artist who was bringing in a completely different view, a journalist. So you see a very good collection of different eminent people who have been working for about 8 months to reflect what should Europe do. My question to them was, I said, look, today Europe sends astronauts into space through NASA, and it works very well, and we have a very good partnership, and we're very happy about that. In the past, we also worked with Russia, but today we have only one big partner, that means NASA, who is bringing astronauts to space. The other nations who can do that are, of course, America, China, and Russia. And soon, India will be capable of transporting astronauts into space. I said, Europe cannot do that. Why not? We have a large economy. If we put European countries together, we have the capacity in terms of technology and engineering, we have the interest and the drive from a science point of view. Why is Europe not having its own human and robotic we have, but human exploration program? That means a European astronaut, a European rocket, a European capsule going to space. And this was my question to these experts. And I said, look, please reflect on this. Is this the way we should do it? And then it's fine. Then we do some other things. Or is there a need for Europe to really wake up and reflect on whether and how this should be done? And these experts, and they are not space people, they have been very critical, I can tell you. They've been asking very unpleasant questions, but we have provided them with all the material they need. They have deliberated, and they really, really, from the bottom of their heart, were writing a report where they have been convinced that Europe makes a mistake if Europe is not engaging much deeper in exploration, human exploration in particular, of course, always coupled with robotic exploration, because it's not an either or, it's a combination of both. And they have really asked and written a report to me, which is on this slide here, called Revolution Space, where they, and this is not us, this is them saying that Europe has to reflect. This is a wake-up call for Europe. Europe has to reflect where Europe wants to go, what Europe should be doing, and whether Europe wants to increase its capacity in exploration at large. And of course, they have given a very ambitious plan. First destination is Leo, low Earth orbit. Next destination is Moon. Eventually Mars on the horizon, but let's be a bit realistic and do the first steps first. Also, it's clear that first comes cargo. As a next step comes crew. And they have given this report to me now to reflect. I've presented this to the member states. Just recently, we had the report came out in mid-March. We had a meeting with member states with our council right there in a brainstorming session and in a formal council. And now they have asked me to develop scenarios, cost estimates, different architectures, different ways of how we are doing it in order to prepare for the Space Summit what we do in exploration. I do not have the answer, I don't want to give the answer, but this is an answer of member states. What we will do, we are preparing all the elements for them to make decisions. We give them, we answer all the questions they have, but they have to make a decision. And at the Space Summit, I do hope that they recognize the importance of exploration. But one comment, one statement which was crystal clear from these high-level advisory people was that this is not about space. Of course it is a space program, but it goes way beyond space. There's a geopolitical dimension. Geopolitics of exploration, you all know it, is so important. If you just imagine, Europe could develop a spacecraft with a European astronaut being the commander, but having another astronaut from Latin America, from Africa, from Asia, maybe even from America. And we could be the ones that would architect such a space flight. Just imagine, this would have enormous impacts on many sectors of cooperation, technological cooperation, but also other cooperations. So the geopolitical aspect is extremely strong. And NASA is doing this very successfully. But I think Europe, which historically is also a country, and I take Europe as a block of countries, which is very good in the international cooperation, with cooperations with so many countries and of different flavors and different colors. And we are very good at that. And I think this is an element, a tool, which can be very powerful. The other element is economic considerations. I have not spoken about it, but there's a huge economy developing in outer space, on the low Earth orbit, with materials, medicine, biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, doing test experiments today in the space station. There's an economic case that they may want to use microgravity for their production of something, or for the development of organs, or there are many different experiments that are taking place. Also on the moon itself, we have just heard from Francis how important it is to not take water from Earth to the moon, but get it from the moon surface, plus regolith, plus many other things. So there will be resources that will be required. That means another new economy will develop on the moon and around the moon, including also navigation, communication as a service. So there's an economic aspect that is developing, and it will happen with or without Europe, or without Europe being strong, because these impulses come from the US. Again, the question is, does Europe want to participate, or does Europe want to stand by and watch others doing it? Another aspect not to underestimate is, and here I look at the young generation in the room, inspiration. Young people need inspiration, need very good projects, attractive projects to stay in Europe, or even us attracting talents from outside Europe. Because if we don't have interesting projects, you people will probably go away. And you probably go to Silicon Valley, or to United Arab Emirates, or to Japan and find a job. So I would like that our politicians make decisions that you have opportunities in the decades to come to work on cool projects. That means a human exploration program. And don't forget, the last element of this group, which they highlighted, is the element of unity. If we have a European flagship project, a European project that unites Europe and doesn't divert Europe, and I don't need to explain how important that element is, especially in times of crisis and war, which we have in front of our door. So there are many aspects which those people have highlighted in exploration, where Europe needs to engage and needs to really become a stronger player on the world scene. Not to be autonomous, not to be isolated, but to be a strong partner in international cooperation, always with NASA, but always with other partners, to really be a strong partner, and only a strong partner is a good partner. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you. This discussion will go into the Space Summit in November this year. So thank you very much.